Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Pastor's Bible Study. My name is Lance Marshall. Glad to continue going through the Gospel of Mark with you. Just a reminder, you can jump in right now if you want, or if you want to start back at the beginning, you can catch up just a few episodes earlier. We'd love to have you go through the entire Gospel with us if you are able. So we are picking up in Mark's Gospel. We're still in chapter 1. We're going to be in verses 29 through 31 first. And this is picking up with Jesus right after he has exorcised evil spirits from a man in the local synagogue. Previous episodes will help explain what this was and what it means and how you might be able to understand it today if that's something you struggle to wrap your mind around with. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that, go back to last week's episode and you can get a much deeper teaching. But for this week, let's go ahead and pick up Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 29 through 31. After leaving the synagogue, Jesus, James, and John went home with Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed, sick with a fever, and they told Jesus about her at once. He went to her, took her by the hand, and raised her up. The fever left her, and she served them. Okay, so I want to talk about this story, and I want to talk about it through two lenses. One is the lens of power, and the other is the lens of honor. So it's just two short verses, but I want to talk about power and honor. So first, the concept of power, right? Jesus comes to the home of these men he's just met, who are now his disciples, and Simon's mother-in-law is sick. And one of the things that Jesus does is heal her. It's a display of his power. So you've had a display of his spiritual power in having power over the evil demons that are exorcising this man. And this is a display of his power over illnesses. We hear that she has a fever. Remember, in the ancient Near East, fevers were very often fatal. I mean, this can be, we have a concept of fevers right now as something that maybe it's bothering you, you go and you get some antibiotics and start feeling better. So they don't know how serious her fever is. This could be a fatal illness for her. So when Jesus is healing her, not only is he healing her from that, but it's something that they might consider to be fatal. Additionally, he actually touches her. Right? He physically touches her. And think about, particularly in a world where things like the transmission of disease and things like that would be very poorly understood, the idea of touching someone, particularly touching someone who has a possibly fatal disease, it's an incredibly powerful symbol of who he is and what he isn't, right? He's not someone that is afraid of illness. He's not someone that is susceptible to catching whatever it is that she has, right? He's not someone who needs to keep his distance. He is someone who will see someone hurting, suffering, and sick and can step right up to them and provide the healing they need. I love the language that gets brought up in her healing. He takes her by the hand, again, touching, right, because he's not afraid, and raised her up. Obviously, that's going to be a pretty significant allusion to something that happens later on in the story. So he physically raises her up, and then it says that she served them. And I want to acknowledge that can kind of rub people the wrong way if you read it in 2021 or 2022 or 2029 or whenever it is that you're watching this lesson. So we can very easily read it as this woman is laying in her home and she's sick, and then Jesus comes and she's better, but now she has to cook dinner, right? We can read that story and it can be really frustrating, but that's the other lens that I want you to experience the story through, and that's through the lens of honor. So one of the things to know is that, like the culture today, but even more so in the past, they lived in an honor-shame society, meaning that one of the things you were always on the lookout for were opportunities to comport yourself with honor, and to be dishonored or to carry shame on yourself or your family was one of the worst things that could happen. And one of the most important aspects of this honor and shame society was the practice of hospitality. You know, the practice of welcoming people, of providing for people, of opening your home for people. And that's easy for us to understand if we think about it, because think about us today. What does it mean to have someone who's incredibly important and meaningful to you and special to you come over to your house, to come over to your table, into your home? I mean, it's really special. Yeah, it's a little bit stressful, but it also means a lot. You're honored by their presence. And it's an honor to get to honor them by showing them an amazing time, right? And so the idea that Simon's mother-in-law is ill and then she gets better and is able to serve them, well, I know in my family, being able to cook dinner and to provide and show hospitality to someone that's come over into our home is something that helps us feel good about ourselves. It makes us feel special. It raises our own self-esteem, our feeling of belonging and purpose. If I can tell you right now, if someone really special is coming over for dinner, I want to be in that kitchen, right? I want to be making the food. I want to be providing. I want to be showing hospitality and exhibiting my love for the person who's there. So yeah, Simon Peter's mother is ill and he heals her. She gets up and she serves them. But if we look through the lens of honor, one of the things that Jesus is allowing her to do is something that she desires to do. He's allowing her to do something that she desires to do, and that is to honor him and his disciples, building up her own self-worth and honor for her family. So I want to look through the idea of this story, both through the lens of the power, who it shows that Jesus is and what he's not, and also the honor that he's allowing others to experience. And that brings me to something I want to talk about really quickly, and it's not just about this story. It's actually going to be something we talk about over and over and over again, not only in this gospel, but all the gospels, and that is the idea that the miraculous works of Jesus, right, particularly meaning the works of Jesus that confound our understanding of time and space, of physics or illness or things like that, having more than one function, specifically having two functions. So one, when we see a miracle story, what I want us to do is look at what does it communicate for the people who experienced the miracle in that time and place, and then what does it communicate about who Jesus is for us today. Does that make sense? When Jesus is doing a miraculous event, a display of power or who he is, it's not just for the people who are there, but it's also communicating something about who he is for us now. So for example, one of the things that this story does is communicate about Jesus' power to heal, about what he's not afraid of, about the distance that he doesn't need to keep from people who are hurting or ill or sick. And it talks a lot about how he allows other people to feel honored, right? Be seen, and to develop self-worth. So that's something he did in that moment, but it also displays something about who he is for us today. If you're one of the people that's watching this in groups, and some increasing number of groups are actually using this to help guide some of their group discussion, this is a great place to pause and to discuss amongst your group. If you're listening to it by yourself on podcast or watching the video, it's a great place to think. Pause and think for yourself. What does this communicate about who Jesus is for me today? Okay, continuing on. Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 32 through 39. That evening, at sunset, people brought to Jesus those who were sick or demon-possessed. The whole town gathered near the door. He healed many who were sick with all kinds of diseases, and he threw out many demons. But he did not let the demons speak, because they recognized him. Early in the morning, well before sunrise, Jesus rose and went to a deserted place where he could be alone in prayer. Simon and those with him tracked him down. When they found him, they told him, "Everyone's looking for you." He replied, "Let's head in the other direction, to the nearby villages, so that I can preach there too. That's why I've come." He traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and throwing out demons. Okay, so I love how it mentions that it's this evening at sunset. All this has happened in the last few verses has been one very packed day. And as sunset is coming down, that means Sabbath is ending. And people are now free to go about and do what they desire to do, which includes carrying those who are ill or sick to Jesus to encounter the healing that he provides. One of the things that it mentions here in particularly is that he doesn't let the demons speak, right? Again, there's a lot of demon addressing here in these first few verses of Mark's Gospel, and he doesn't let them speak. Remember, one of the things that's been very clear from the beginning is that forces of spiritual opposition immediately recognize Jesus for who he is, for what he's empowered to do, for his purposes, right? They know who he is immediately. People don't. They have no idea, even these earliest followers, but forces of spiritual opposition do. And one of the things that Jesus says is he doesn't let him speak. Or, excuse me, it says that Jesus does not let them speak. There's lots of really interesting academic study on why exactly, right? What is it that they're trying to say? What is it that Jesus is trying to stop from taking place? You can entertain yourself with all kinds of research there if you have an interest to do so. My favorite thought is the simplest one, and that is, man, don't feed the trolls, right? Don't let people who have nothing good to say anything, right? You don't have any time for that kind of evil being spewed out. No, thank you, right? I think that's the best understanding. Sometimes the simplest one is also the clearest. So what's happening is people are beginning to understand the power that Jesus has. And one of the things they're not immediately trying to do is understand exactly what's going on. They're not trying to immediately understand, okay, wait, explain to us theologically who you are and how you connect. Look, they're just sick and they need healing. And so they're coming to the one who can provide healing. And that's one of the things that I want to point out. Too often we feel like a journey of faith has to start with knowledge or understanding or theology or something like that. I want to lift up, it is absolutely okay to say, I don't know how this works. I don't know how the power works. I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't need to know. But I am hurting, and I know that here there is healing, and that is okay. It's okay to enter into a life of faith or just kicking the tires on Christianity by saying, I don't know how this works, but I know that I am hurting, and I know that here I can find healing. So let me experience that first. That is absolutely okay. That's what we see happening in this story. And then I want to lift up something that Jesus models for us here. And that is, after, in the midst of all this, he goes to a deserted place where he could be alone in prayer. Very early in the morning, before sunrise, that kind of experience, right, where I can imagine what the day has been like. It's been an absolutely packed day full of these healings and power displays, and everyone, I'm sure, goes to sleep well into the night. And then early the next morning, before sunrise, they get up and Jesus is gone, right? He's left the home. He's gone out into a deserted place so that he could be alone in prayer. I want to pause and I want to lift up that that's something that we're going to see over and over and over again in the accounts of Jesus' life, is that in the midst of this hustle and bustle and the crowds and the energy and the displays of power and the exhaustion, the miracles and the celebration and the tears and all these kind of things, Jesus will go off on his own. He'll need to step away from all that. He'll need to step away from the chaos and the craziness. He'll need to, I imagine, catch his breath and rest. And the most important thing that he does is pray. Why is that? Why is it that Jesus needs to pray? It's something to think about, right? What is he experiencing in prayer? What is he experiencing when he goes and has quiet time with the Father? I think one of the things is that Jesus is displaying to us, right, not just teaching, but also modeling what it is to have a life that is rooted in God. A life that includes prayer that's not just about saying how you're feeling and asking God for things, but actually staying rooted in God and God's purposes. And that's not something that happens right in the midst of the chaos. There has to be a way of respite. There has to be a way of stepping aside. There has to be a moment of allowing yourself a moment to breathe, right? Even Jesus needed to rest and to restore and to reconnect. What does that have to say about us and what we need? What is Jesus modeling for us here, and how can we take that model into our own life? Again, if you're one of the people who's going through this with a group or in our live classes, why don't we pause here and have a moment to discuss? That's something that we're going to see from Jesus over and over and over again, and it has extremely strong implications for how we should be modeling our own lives. We're not facing nearly the same trials or struggles, yet we have that same need built into us. Okay, Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 40 through 45 are our next scripture readings. Let's go here. A man with a skin disease approached Jesus, fell to his knees, and begged, "If you want, you can make me clean." Incensed, Jesus reached out his hand, touched him, and said, "I do want to. Be clean." Instantly, the skin disease left him, and he was clean. Sternly, Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't say anything to anyone. Instead, go and show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifice for your cleansing that Moses commanded. This will be a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and started talking freely and spreading the news so that Jesus wasn't able to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, but people came to him from everywhere. Okay, so we have another power display, right? We have another miraculous healing that occurs. And before we talk about the healing, I want to talk a little bit about what it is that this man is experiencing, how it is that he is suffering, and what that healing might mean for him. So depending on what translation you're reading in English, remember this portion of scripture is written in Greek, and ancient Greek has a lot of nuances to it that are difficult to match one for one with modern English. And so some important words that you read might be translated in different ways in different English translations. Some translations that you're reading, particularly older ones, might translate the affliction that this man is suffering from as the word leprosy. Well, we've since learned in more modern scholarship that the Hebrew word that's used for the condition leprosy is actually used for almost any skin condition. It's a wide variety of skin conditions, not just that one condition that we might today label as leprosy. So that's why this Common English Bible translation, by virtue of that more modern scholarship, says that he's suffering from a skin disease. Now, an important thing to know in his culture, he's a Jewish man living in a Jewish community, likely a peasant in a rural area, is that their life would have been ordered around the commandments of Torah. Well, one of the commandments of Torah requires that people who are suffering from certain afflictions be separated from the community. Now, a lot of those aspects have to do with what it is to keep an ancient Near Eastern community healthy. So this man, it's interesting when he speaks to Jesus, he doesn't say, if you want, you can make me healed of this condition. He doesn't say what you can do is like a physician cure this infection. What he says is you can make me clean. So one of the big issues that this man is articulating that he's suffering from is the status of being considered ritually unclean. So in their society, again, this has a lot more to do with their religious convictions and understandings. This disease has marked him as ritually unclean, which means he has to stay away from the community. It means he has to stay away from family and friends. It also means he has to stay away from the practices of worship. He's ritually unclean, so he can't participate. So this man is not only suffering physical illness, right? That is, of course, painful and agitating and distressing to him, but he's also suffering socially, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. He's suffering in all of those ways. And when he sees Jesus, he says, if you want, you can make me clean. It's actually a beautiful way of modeling how it is to pray, recognizing that Jesus has the power, but that he doesn't control Jesus. He says, if you want, you can make me clean. He comes to Jesus literally in prayer, wanting to be healed of more than his body, but to be healed emotionally, relationally, socially, and spiritually. Now, we get to an interesting point here in verse 41 where we have a couple different Greek manuscripts. I don't want to get too deep into the Bible nerd stuff, but we have some ancient copies of this scripture that have a few differing characteristics, and one of them is what is the word that's written right here. You'll see a note in the Common English Bible, if you're reading that it'll say most critical editions of the Greek New Testament read filled with compassion. So there's two different Greek words that are used here. But one of the things that's impossible to ignore is that Jesus has an extremely strong emotional reaction to this man's state. Right? He has an extremely emotional reaction to this man's condition. It's not just a positive emotion. It comes back to in verse 43 when it says, sternly Jesus sent him away. Now, do we think Jesus is angry at this man? I don't think so. I don't think Jesus is in any way angry at this man who, for no fault of his own, is suffering from this condition. But something is very upsetting to Jesus about this man's situation. What do we think that might be? I think there's a really good chance that Jesus is upset at what has happened to this man as a result of how he's been treated, the ways in which he's suffering, the ways in which he's hurting, the ways in which he feels isolated and alone. And so Jesus has a strong emotional reaction, and he tells them, I do want to be clean. The man is healed of that skin disease, and then Jesus sends him back to the priest and says, go, show themselves, and offer a sacrifice for your cleansing that Moses commanded. That's going to be the vehicle through which he experiences reintroduction into the community. If someone, in order to be marked no longer ritually unclean, they have to have a priest certification and make an offering to do so. So what Jesus is saying is go back and experience reintroduction into the community that means so much to you and that connection back with God. He also says that doing so is going to be a testimony to them, meaning these priests, seeing what has been made possible in this man's life, are going to understand just a little bit about what's happening in Jesus. That's one of the reasons that he's led him to go do that. And there's a final interesting aspect that happens here, and this is about what Jesus says to him. But before we consider that, again, every time we have a miraculous account, we want to consider not only what happened for this man, but what does this story mean about who Jesus is for us today. This man's experienced not only healing of the body, but also healing emotionally, socially, relationally, and spiritually. So again, if you're part of a group or even if you're by yourself, pause and think about, what does this miraculous account teach about who Jesus is for us today? Okay, now once you've had a chance to do that, one of the things that we're going to see over and over again in the Gospels is Jesus doing something amazing and then saying, now don't tell anybody. Okay, now don't tell anybody. And that's so hard for us to understand, because living on the other side of the crucifixion and the resurrection and Pentecost and 2,000 years of Christian history, one of the things that we understand that is baked into the DNA of being a Christian is sharing the story of what Christ has done, right? Proclaiming who Christ is, what Christ has made possible, the healings that Christ has done in your life and the life of others. And so the idea that Jesus would do something like this and then say, now don't tell anybody, is so confusing to us. But the reason why is pretty simple. I mean, look what happens when this man starts telling about what Jesus has done. Huge crowds start following Jesus to the point where he can't even go in and actually teach the things that he needs to teach. So not only is his teaching ministry interrupted, but with that attention comes a lot of negative pressure. Because we're going to see over and over and over again that when Jesus is teaching what he's teaching and doing what he's doing and saying what he's saying and promising that he is who he is, well, that's ultimately going to start the road towards certain people getting so angry and so threatened that they'll conspire for him to be killed. One of the things that Jesus is trying to manage is the need for him to train up his disciples, the need for him to teach and reveal what needs to be taught and revealed and displayed, and doing so knowing that as he does so, the temperature is going to keep raising up all the way to the point of the cross. So yeah, you saw this, but don't tell anybody yet, because there's still so much work to be done. In this man's story, we see what happens when that's not what happens. Jesus is so overwhelmed by the followers that doing his ministry is complicated. But at the same time, can you blame the guy? I mean, can you blame the guy? What would your response be to having experienced some kind of healing like that, restoration like that, reconciliation like that? That's what I want us to close with thinking about today. Have you ever had an experience like this man, like Simon's mother-in-law, where you've experienced some kind of healing or restoration by virtue of encountering Jesus in your life? Have you seen it happen in the lives of others? And if so, is it something that you can really keep to yourself? Friends, thank you so much for joining us with this portion of Pastor's Bible Study. Can't wait to be back with you with next week's lessons soon. Bye-bye.